Good evening, and welcome back. Wherever you are right now, whether you are lying in the dark with your phone balanced on your chest, or sitting in a car that stopped moving 20 minutes ago and somehow you are still here, or maybe you have put on headphones and you are trying to trick your brain into sleep. Wherever you are, I am glad you came. Drop a comment if you want. Tell me where you are in the world. Tell me what time it is for you. I like to imagine the map of it. I like to think about all the different darknesses we are sharing right now. Each one separate, each one somehow the same. Tonight, we are talking about a god. Not a popular one, that is important. We are talking about a god who was born into the highest possible family, who held genuine cosmic power, who stood at the center of human civilization for thousands of years, and who was, by nearly every account, unwanted, unliked, uncomfortable to be around. His own father said so. His own mother was embarrassed by him. The mortals who prayed to him did so the way you might call a number you are not sure still works, with a kind of desperate hope that maybe this time will be different, but low expectations overall. His name was Ares, and the story of why nobody wanted to worship the god of war, a god of war, in a civilization that was almost perpetually at war, is one of the stranger things antiquity left us. But to understand Ares, we have to go back further. We have to go back to the beginning, and I mean that literally. We have to go back to before the gods, before the world, before light had a name. Because the darkness that made Ares what he was did not start with him. It started with everything. In the beginning, and I want you to hold this word loosely, because the Greeks understood beginnings as slippery things, as doors that open onto other doors. In the beginning, there was chaos. Not chaos in the way we use it now, not disorder, not noise, not a crowded room or a broken system. The Greek chaos was something closer to a gap, a yawning, an opening in the nothing that allowed space for something to eventually exist. The ancient sources disagree on exactly what it was. Some say it was pure void. Others say it was more like fog, or like the space between inhale and exhale. Hesiod, writing in the 8th century BCE, treats it with extraordinary brevity, as if trying to describe it too precisely would be the wrong approach, would pin the wrong specimen to the board. He says only that first of all chaos came into being, and then moves on, quickly, almost nervously. From this gap, from this yawn at the heart of nothing, came Gaia, the deep-breasted earth, and with her or beside her, or perhaps as a consequence of her, came Tartarus, the pit beneath the pit, the abyss that undergirds all things, and Eros, the oldest Eros, the cosmic one, the one who has nothing to do with arrows or Valentine's Day, but is instead the fundamental binding force of the universe, the pull between things, the reason anything coheres at all. Darkness came, Erebus, the deep dark, and Nyx, the night. They were among the firstborn, the original children of the nothing, and from Nyx and Erebus came their opposite, Ether, the bright upper air, and Hemera, the day. Even in the beginning, the Greeks built their cosmology on opposites. on the tension between things that should cancel each other out, but instead held each other in place. Gaia produced Uranus on her own, the sky, and stretched him out above herself like a canopy, like a roof, like a husband. She also made the mountains. She made the sea. And then, because the ancients understood that everything fertile must eventually be violated, Uranus lay down with her, and the Titans were born. 12 of them at first, enormous, ancient, slow-thinking, powerful beyond any measure a mortal mind can hold. Oceanus and Tethys, who together generated all the rivers of the world. Hyperion and Thea, from whom light itself descended. Cronus and Rhea, the youngest and cleverest of the 12, who would become the parents of the gods we now remember best. But before Cronus, before the Titans properly ruled, there was the first great violence. Because Uranus looked at his children and felt what many fathers feel before they understand what fathering means, he felt afraid. He took the Titans as they were born and shoved them back, pushed them into the earth, into Gaia's own body. He did not want rivals. He did not want successors. He wanted the world to remain as it was, with him spread above it like a ceiling that nothing could lift. Gaia suffered. She is the earth, and the earth was holding 12 Titans inside it. And this is not a metaphor you need to work hard to understand. She hurt, and from her pain she made something new. A great curved blade, grey adamantine, the first sickle, and she went to her children and asked which of them would help her. Only Cronus answered. He took the sickle. He waited. And when Uranus came to lie with Gaia in the darkness, Cronus reached out and castrated his father with one long stroke of that impossible blade. The blood of Uranus fell into the sea. From it, in time, came the Furies and the giants and the ash tree nymphs called the Meliae, and the severed parts of the sky god drifted on the foam and became Aphrodite, she who will matter enormously to Ares, she who will be the only one who truly sees him, a fact that is strange and right and probably says something about both of them. Uranus, wounded and castrated and no longer able to cover the earth, lifted away. He became the sky as we know it, distant, cold, beautiful, and very far from anything that might hurt him again. As he rose, he cursed his children. He called them Titans, which some say means the straining ones or the reaching ones, and he told them that what they had done to him would be done to them. A prophecy and a promise and a wound all at once. This is the first time we see it, the pattern that will run through everything that follows. A father fears his children. A child takes violent action to escape or replace the father. The world shifts and the prophecy curves back. The Greeks understood this, not as tragedy, but as mechanism. This is how time works. This is what succession means. You are made by the thing that will eventually destroy you, and you make the thing that will eventually destroy you. And the wheel does not apologize for being a wheel. Cronus ruled after Uranus retreated. The Titans flourished in what the Greeks would later call the Golden Age, though they did not call it that yet. There was abundance. there was time. Cronus ruled with Rhea, and the world breathed. But Uranus's curse did not dissolve just because Uranus was no longer watching, and Gaia, old, deep, patient, always knowing more than she says, told Cronus what he already feared in the part of himself he couldn't name, that his own child would overthrow him, that the pattern would repeat, that the wheel, having turned once, would turn again. Cronus did what powerful men have done in every age when confronted with prophecy. He tried to stop time. He swallowed his children as Rhea bore them. Hestia, the eldest, first, then Demeter, then Hera, then Hades, then Poseidon. 5 children swallowed whole, imprisoned in the body of their father, the way the Titans had once been imprisoned in the body of their grandmother, the Earth. History rhyming with itself in the most brutal possible way. Rhea endured this for 5 children. On the 6th, she decided she was done. She wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes. She handed it to Cronus. He swallowed it without looking, which tells you something about how certain he was of his own power, about how little he thought the details mattered. And the 6th child, Zeus, the youngest, the one who would matter most, was spirited away to Crete, to a cave on Mount Ida or Mount Dicte, depending on which version you trust, where the Curetes, the divine guardians, clashed their shields together so loudly that the infant's cries could not be heard from above. Zeus grew in secret. He grew quickly, the way important things do in myths, because the story is impatient to reach the part where he matters. He grew, and he was educated, and eventually he returned to his father's court in disguise, and gave Cronus an emetic, some say a potion, prepared by Metis, the Titaness of cunning, and Cronus vomited up his children. They came out the way they went in, fully formed, divine, furious, and ready. The war that followed is called the Titanomachy, and it lasted 10 years, which in mythological terms means it lasted long enough to be a different kind of time than ordinary time. On one side, Zeus and his siblings, the new gods, the Olympians who did not yet have Olympus, who fought from the peak of Mount Othrys at first, using it as their base and their fortress. On the other side, the Titans, ancient and immense and armored in the weight of ages. The outcome was not immediately obvious. The Titans were older. They had experience and mass on their side. The war was close enough that fate had to intervene. Zeus went down to Tartarus. He freed the beings Uranus had imprisoned there before the Titans themselves had ever been born. The Cyclopes, one-eyed and vast, who had been in the dark so long they had forgotten what light felt like. And the Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed ones, Cottus and Briareus and Gyges, whose 100 hands each could throw 100 boulders at once, and whose loyalty, once given, was absolute. The Cyclopes made gifts for the 3 brothers. For Zeus, the thunderbolt, the weapon of weapons, the thing that makes the sky itself into an instrument of destruction. For Poseidon, the trident, 3-pronged and oceanic, and able to shake the earth. For Hades, the helm of invisibility, which is the strangest gift of the 3, a gift not of power, but of absence, of the ability to unmake one's own presence, which suits him. With these weapons and these allies, the Olympians pushed. The Hecatoncheires threw their stones, and the Titans fell. The earth groaned, the sea boiled. Even the underworld shook. And at the end of it, Zeus drove the Titans into Tartarus, the same pit that had held the Cyclopes, the same darkness that had been waiting since before the beginning, and he set the Hecatoncheires to guard them. And then came the question every revolution eventually has to answer: what now? The three brothers divided the cosmos between them. Zeus drew lots, or proposed the drawing of lots, which amounts to the same thing when you are the one who won the war. And the air and Olympus went to Zeus, the sea went to Poseidon, the underworld went to Hades, and the earth was held in common. It was a settlement. It was a peace that preserved the hierarchy, with Zeus unmistakably at the top, but gave each sibling enough that rebellion would cost too much. The goddesses received their domains differently over time, through negotiation and power and sometimes force. Hera became queen of Olympus through her marriage to Zeus, a marriage that is itself a complicated story, involving a cuckoo and a mountain and various forms of coercion depending on who is telling it. Demeter held the grain and the earth's fertility. Athena, born fully armed from Zeus's skull after he swallowed Metis, held wisdom and strategic warfare and craftsmanship. Artemis held the hunt. Aphrodite held love and desire. Hestia held the hearth. This is the order of things as the Greeks understood it, not arbitrary, but earned, not just given, but contested and settled and continuously maintained. Every god held their domain the way you hold a position you know someone else might want, with attention, with authority, and with the memory of what it cost to get here. But the settlement had gaps. Every settlement does. There were domains that nobody claimed cleanly, or that several gods claimed partially, or that were necessary but undesirable. War was one of them. The way war had to be divided is, I think, the most revealing thing about how the Greeks understood violence itself. They split it into two gods, which means they understood, at some level, that violence is not one thing. It contains multitudes. It is not just the breaking of things, it is also the strategy by which things are broken, and those are profoundly different. Athena took the strategic side, the planning, the tactics, the organized, disciplined, purposeful application of force toward a larger goal. She is the war of generals and walls and supply lines, and thinking 3 moves ahead. She carries a spear and a shield, but she uses them as a mathematician uses numbers, as precise tools in the service of a problem she intends to solve. And Ares took the rest. What is the rest? It is the part of war that is not strategy, the hunger for violence itself, the red narrowing of the world that happens when a battle reaches its peak, the sound and the heat and the blood and the animal simplicity of it, the part of war that no general can fully control, that breaks free of plans and objectives and becomes something with its own momentum, its own logic, its own appetite. the part of war that men sometimes describe afterward with a shame they cannot fully explain because they found it intoxicating. Ares is the residue of all the strategy. He is what is left when you subtract the thinking. This is already a peculiar thing to be, but it gets more complicated because war in the ancient world was not optional. It was constant. It was survival. The Greek city-states warred with each other with the regularity of seasons. And yet the god of this essential, constant, omnipresent thing, the god of the activity that shaped Greek civilization more than almost any other, was not honored, was not celebrated with grand temples, was not invoked with the warmth reserved for Zeus or Athena or Apollo or Demeter. He was needed the way you need a storm drain. You are glad it exists. You would be in serious trouble without it, but you do not build a monument to it. The Homeric hymn to Ares is short, perfunctory. It reads like an obligation. Nobody wanted Ares. Let us think about where he came from, exactly, because the parentage matters. He was the son of Zeus and Hera, full-blooded Olympian, legitimate, the product of the ruling couple of the universe. He was not a demigod, not a child of a mortal liaison, not someone whose claim to divinity was partial or contested. He was as Olympian as it was possible to be. And yet, there is a story, and I want to hold it lightly because it is late and the sources are complicated. A story in which Hera claims that she conceived Ares alone, without Zeus, as a kind of counter to Zeus's creation of Athena without her. In this version, Ares is a kind of mistake, or a demonstration of what happens when you try to replicate divine creation without the proper conditions. He is Hera's proof of concept, and the proof does not quite work. Most versions give him Zeus as his father, but even there, the relationship is not warm. Homer's Zeus says it plainly, with a directness that would be shocking if it weren't delivered so casually. He tells Ares that he is the god he hates most, that if Ares were born of anyone else, he would have been thrown into Tartarus long ago. He is tolerated because he is blood. He is despised because of what he is. The mother-son relationship with Hera is not much better, though it is more complicated. Hera defends Ares when she must, cares for him in crisis, weeps for him when he is wounded, but she does not seem to like him particularly. Her care is maternal in the way that maternal sometimes means obligatory rather than warm. She protects what she produced. That is different from enjoying it. What did it feel like, I wonder, to be Ares, to be fully divine, fully legitimate, held in everyone's hand as needed, and then set down when the need passed? There is something here I find hard to name. The particular loneliness of being important but not valued, of being necessary but not wanted, of being called upon in crisis and then asked, when the crisis passes, to please go stand somewhere else. He did not have a famous city. Athens belonged to Athena, Corinth to Aphrodite, Argos to Hera, Delphi to Apollo, Sparta. You might think Sparta of all places would be his, but Sparta's tutelary deity was also Athena in her warlike aspect. Even the most warlike city in Greece preferred the thinking goddess to the feeling one. The Aeropagus in Athens, the hill of Ares, was named for him. There was blood on it, very old blood, from a story about Ares killing Poseidon's son Helirotheus for assaulting his daughter. The Olympians tried him on that hill. He was acquitted. Later, the Athenians used the same hill as their high court, their council, the place where the most serious judgments were made. It is typical, somehow. Even the place named for Ares was eventually taken over by law, by order, by the very civilizing impulse that Ares, by his nature, could never embody. He had children. This is worth noting. Ares was not the god of loneliness. He was the god of passion, and passion produces children. He had many of them, and the ones who matter are interesting in the way that funhouse reflections are interesting. They are distorted versions of their father, exaggerations or negations of what he was. Phobos, fear; Deimos, dread; Eris, discord, though some say she was not his daughter but his sister, which might be even more correct. Harmonia, and this one is the strange one, the one that stops you. Harmony, the daughter of Ares and Aphrodite, the child of war and love, who became the bride of Cadmus, the founder of Thebes, and whose wedding gifts included a necklace that would be the ruin of generations. Harmony, daughter of conflict and desire. The Greeks thought this made sense. And then there was Cycnus, one of several sons named Cycnus, each one a brute, each one destroyed eventually by Heracles. And Diomedes, not the hero of Troy, but the king of the Bistones, the one who fed his horses human flesh, the one Heracles killed and fed to those same horses, as a final irony that the Greeks found satisfying in the grim particular way they found things satisfying. Ares fathered monsters and terrors and the personifications of the things war produces: panic, fear, the collapse of social order, and also, inexplicably, harmony, which might be the most honest thing about him. Violence, if it ends, produces a kind of silence. Sometimes that silence gets called peace. Sometimes, if you squint, you can almost call it harmony. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Before the myths settle into their cast of characters, before the heroes arrive, there is the question of what happened to human beings and where they came from and why they suffer. The Greeks had several answers to this, which means they had no single answer, which means they were honest about it. In Hesiod's version, the most complete one we have, humanity was made by the gods, but not in a single creation. We were made in stages, in races, in what he calls ages, each one a step down from the one before it. This is not a cheerful cosmology. This is the cosmology of people who looked around at the world they lived in and concluded that it must have been better once, because the evidence suggests it is not very good now. The first race was gold. These were the men, and they were men, mortal men, no women yet in this telling, who lived in the time of Cronus. Not the Cronus who swallowed his children, but the Cronus of the long reign before that, when the Titans were young and perhaps wiser than they later became. The golden race did not labor. The earth gave freely. They did not age in the way we age. They died as one dies in sleep, gently, and became the daimones of the upper air, invisible guardians of the living world. The second race was silver, and already the diminishment is visible. These were slower, stupider, longer lived in childhood, but shorter in their prime, and they failed to honor the gods properly, which the Greeks understood as both moral failing and practical error. Zeus destroyed them. They became the blessed dead of the underworld, honored but not free. The third race was bronze, hard, violent, enormous. They loved war. They cared for nothing else, and they destroyed themselves with it, not by divine intervention, but by their own hands, their own excess. They went down into the house of Hades and left no names. Here Hesiod inserts a fourth age that does not fit the metal scheme at all, and this is honest in a way that neat systems rarely are. He inserts the age of heroes, the demigods, the ones we tell stories about, Achilles and Heracles and Perseus and the great warriors of Thebes and Troy. He makes them better than the bronze men, even though they came after, because Hesiod was a Greek, and the Greeks could not quite make themselves call their heroes a degradation. The heroes went to Elysium, the blessed islands, where they live in ease. This is the mythology being sentimental about itself, which I find endearing. And then the fifth race, which is iron, and which is us, the current one, the worst one, the one where Hesiod says this as if it is almost too much to put into words. Nobody keeps their oaths, nobody honors their parents, nobody values the just man over the clever one. He says that if he could have been born in any other age, he would have chosen it. He says it with the specific misery of a man who has watched too many specific injustices and is tired of explaining to people why those injustices matter. This is the world Ares lives in, not the world of the Golden Age, where war was unnecessary because abundance was total. Not even the world of the heroes, where war was ennobling because the ones who fought it were larger than life. The Iron Age, the age of attrition and broken promises and violence that does not lead anywhere, that does not produce anyone like Achilles, that just grinds. Ares is the god of Iron Age war. That is what people felt when they thought about him. Not the war of honor and kleos and glory and the specific beauty of a hero's death, the other kind. Let me collect the thread here, because we have covered a lot of ground and the story has many more rooms to walk through. We have the beginning of everything, the chaos and the gap, the birth of the Titans, the terrible violence of castration and displacement, the Titanomachy, the settlement of the cosmos, the establishment of Olympian order. We have the races of men, the long slide from gold to iron. And we have Ares, placed somewhere in this order as both necessary and unwanted, the god of the worst part of the most necessary thing. Now we need the people who walked through this world, the figures whose stories clarified what all of this meant, whose lives, impossible, miraculous, broken lives, gave the abstractions shape. There is a girl who was not supposed to be born into power, or rather, she was born into the wrong kind of power, born to a mother who had been swallowed, and a father who was the universe itself, and her birth was the most dramatic entry into the world that Greek mythology records. Athena. Her mother was Metis, the titaness of counsel and cunning, one of Zeus's earliest consorts. Metis, even before she and Zeus were together, was understood to be the most intelligent being in the cosmos, the one from whom wisdom itself descended. And Gaia and Uranus, ever the oracles, told Zeus that Metis would first bear a daughter equal to her father in power, and then a son who would overthrow him. Zeus had heard this story before. He knew what it produced. He did something that even by Olympian standards is memorable. He swallowed Metis, the same way his own father had swallowed his siblings. The same gesture, repeating, because the Greeks understood that power does not invent new gestures. It just repeats the old ones with different hands. But Metis was already pregnant, and inside Zeus, she made armor. She made a helmet. She hammered deep in the divine body of the king of gods, and the sound of her hammering gave Zeus a headache that no amount of divine painkiller could address. Eventually, in some versions, it was Hephaestus who split his skull. In others, it was Prometheus, and the disagreement matters because the identity of the helper changes what the act means. Eventually, Zeus's head was split open, and out came Athena, fully grown, fully armored, shouting her war cry. I want to sit with that image for a moment. Born shouting, born already prepared, born from the headache caused by the suppressed intelligence of her own mother, wearing the armor her mother made for her inside the body of the father who ate the mother. Every piece of that is meaningful, and I genuinely do not know where to start with it, which is why I am just going to leave it there. Athena grew up in a sense that has nothing to do with time. She grew up in authority, in influence, in the scope of what she governed. She became the patron of Athens through a contest with Poseidon. He struck the rock of the Acropolis with his trident and produced a saltwater spring. She touched the same rock and produced an olive tree, and the Athenians chose the olive tree because they were practical, and the olive tree had uses, and the saltwater spring did not. And in winning that contest, she became the most celebrated goddess in the most celebrated city in Greece. Athena and Ares are set against each other in the Iliad, in one of Homer's most pointed scenes. They meet on the battlefield, and she beats him. She uses the spear of a mortal hero against him, and Ares falls, his body covering 7 acres, which is Homer's way of saying that the fall of Ares is not a small event. The goddess of strategic war defeats the god of battle frenzy. The point is not subtle. Homer is telling his audience something they already believed, that the thinking kind of war, the organized, purposeful kind, is stronger than the feeling kind. But here is what I keep coming back to. Athena wins the battle. She wins it easily, almost contemptuously. And then the Iliad continues, and the war continues, and Ares, wounded, humiliated, treated by Paeon, the divine physician who heals the gods. Ares continues to be relevant. The war needs him. You can beat him on the field, and he still does not go away, because the thing he represents does not go away just because you win an argument with it. He was born into an atmosphere of rejection, and he stayed in it his entire mythological life. He was mocked by Hephaestus, who was his brother, and also the husband of Aphrodite, who was Ares' great love. The story of how Hephaestus caught them together is among the most famous comedic myths in Greek literature. Hephaestus, the smith god, forged an invisible net so fine it could not be seen, draped it over the bed, pretended to leave, and then summoned all the Olympians to laugh at Ares and Aphrodite, tangled and naked and helpless. And they laughed. The gods laughed. Ares, caught in a net by a lame blacksmith, publicly humiliated before the entire divine court, exposed in the one place he had felt something like warmth. What is remarkable is that the myth does not give him a satisfying revenge. He is freed. He goes away. Aphrodite goes to Cyprus. The story moves on, the way stories do when they have made their point and have nothing more to say. But he loved her. Or the myths say he loved her, which in Greek terms means he was drawn to her with the compulsive intensity that Aphrodite produces in whoever she touches. And this is complicated because Aphrodite is not just the goddess of love, but the goddess of the eros that attaches itself to whatever it attaches itself to and does not ask permission. Whether Ares chose his attachment to Aphrodite or was fated to it, and in a world where the daughter of desire is also the daughter of the Seafoam from Uranus's castrated body, the question of what is chosen and what is produced by ancient wounds is not clearly answerable. What they had together, in any case, produced harmonia, the idea that something coherent and beautiful might come from the marriage of violence and desire. The Greeks could not quite let go of this hope. Perseus was different from Ares in every way, which is why he is worth spending time on here. He is the hero who succeeds where Ares fails, not in violence, but in the navigation of divine hostility. His birth was impossible, as hero births tend to be. His grandfather Acrisius, king of Argos, received a prophecy from the oracle at Delphi. His daughter Danae would bear a son who would kill him. The prophecy did not say when. Prophecies rarely specify the timeline, which is part of their cruelty. Acrisius made the decision that seemed logical and turned out to be wrong, the way logical decisions always turn out to be wrong when the universe has already decided the other thing. He locked Danae in a bronze chamber underground. Zeus came through the ceiling as golden rain. The Greeks did not find this preposterous. Zeus took many forms for many women, and the forms were always appropriate to the situation in a poetic way. He came as an eagle for Ganymede, as a swan for Leda, as a bull for Europa, as gold for Danae, who was locked in bronze and given only what could filter through the cracks. There is a terrible metaphor in that, and I think the Greeks knew it. Perseus was born. Acrisius, refusing to accept the prophecy, while also refusing to simply kill his daughter and face the consequence of that, put Danae and the infant Perseus in a chest and threw them into the sea. This is the gesture of someone trying to give fate to the ocean and make it someone else's problem. The ocean, naturally, did not accept this responsibility. They washed up on the island of Seriphos. A fisherman named Dictys found them. He was a good man, as supporting characters in hero myths sometimes are. Unglamorous, functional, kind. The kind of person the story needs to proceed, but who does not get a lot of narrative attention. He gave them shelter. His brother Polydectes was the king of the island, and Polydectes wanted Danae, and Perseus stood between him and what he wanted, which made Perseus the problem. Polydectes set a trap that worked the way traps work when they are set by people who are not very clever against people who are very willing. He announced he was going to marry someone else and asked all the men of the island to bring gifts of horses. Perseus had no horses and announced, with the confidence of a very young man who has not yet been seriously tested, that he would bring instead the head of Medusa. This was the kind of offer you cannot take back. Medusa, one of the Gorgons, 3 sisters whose gaze turned living things to stone. She was, in the older myths, mortal. Her sisters, Stheno and Euryale, were immortal, but Medusa could be killed, which was the sliver of possibility that made the quest not entirely suicidal. She had once been beautiful in some versions. In Ovid's account, Poseidon violated her in Athena's temple, and Athena, furious, not at Poseidon, but at Medusa, which is the part of the story that sits in your chest wrong, that is supposed to sit wrong, I think, turned her into a monster. Perseus received help from gods who had reasons of their own. Hermes gave him a sickle, or a short sword. Athena gave him a polished shield so bright it could function as a mirror. The Graeae, the 3 old women who shared a single eye and a single tooth between them, were forced to give him information about where the Hesperides were located. He stole the eye, mid-pass between them, and held it hostage, which is the kind of trick that would be contemptible if the story didn't need him to succeed. The Hesperides gave him the cap of invisibility, the kibisis bag for the head, the winged sandals. He found Medusa sleeping. He looked only at her reflection in Athena's shield. He cut her head off. From Medusa's neck, from the wound, came 2 beings who had been waiting inside her, Chrysaor, the giant with the golden sword, and Pegasus, the winged horse. This is an image that demands more attention than the story usually gives it. The monster carries within her the beautiful and the powerful, the sacred and the martial. The death of Medusa is also a birth. The Greeks were always doing this, layering deaths and births on top of each other so you couldn't tell which was which. Perseus put the head in the bag and flew north on the winged sandals and met Andromeda on a rock above the sea. She was chained there. Her mother, Cassiopeia, had claimed to be more beautiful than the Nereids, the sea nymphs, and Poseidon, offended on their behalf, had sent a sea monster to ravage the coast of Ethiopia. The oracle said the only remedy was Andromeda. So Andromeda was chained to a rock above the sea, and the monster was on its way. Perseus killed the monster. He flew down, saw Andromeda, killed the monster, and claimed her as his bride. It is one of the most summary rescues in the mythology. The monster is barely described, the battle almost perfunctory compared to the labors that preceded it. The monster is not the point. Andromeda is not quite the point either, though she will travel with Perseus and bear his children and become, eventually, a constellation. The point is that Perseus, having survived impossible odds through divine assistance and his own willingness to try things that could not possibly work, has also become the kind of person who can take the measure of a situation and act within it. He returned to Seriphos, where Polydectes was still bullying his mother. He showed him Medusa's head. Polydectes turned to stone. And then Perseus did something that most heroes do not do. He went back to Argos. He went back to the place where his story began, to the grandfather who had tried to drown him. Not for revenge. The myth is specific that it was not for revenge, but because he wanted to compete in athletic games in a nearby city, and Acrisius, recognizing his grandson, fled, and at the games, Perseus threw a discus, and the wind caught it, or the crowd shifted, depending on the version, and the discus struck an old man in the crowd. The old man was Acrisius. The prophecy did not arrive with fury or lightning. It arrived as an accident, an athletic game, a wind, the most mortal, most undramatic, most specifically human version of fate you can imagine. The universe does not require spectacle. It only requires patience. Perseus did not inherit Argos. He was too troubled by what he had done, even accidentally, to rule the city associated with the man he had killed. He traded kingdoms with a cousin and became king of Tiryns instead, and from him, in the long counting of generations, descended Heracles. Heracles. I should say at the outset that I could spend the entire rest of this telling on Heracles alone, and part of me wants to, and the other part of me knows that we have Ares still to return to, and Troy still ahead of us, and so I will give Heracles the attention he deserves while trying not to lose the thread entirely. He was born, as his name will eventually come to mean, as a glory of Hera, though Hera spent most of his life trying to destroy him. This is the particular bitterness at the center of his story, that the goddess, whose name was woven into his, was also his most relentless enemy, not because of anything Heracles did, but because of who his father was. Zeus, again, always Zeus. Alcmene was his mortal mother, wife of Amphitryon. Zeus came to her in the form of Amphitryon while Amphitryon was away. In some versions, he extended the night, making it the longest night of the year, stretching time so that the conception would be complete. When Amphitryon returned, not knowing what had happened, he lay with Alcmene himself. Heracles and Iphicles, his mortal twin, were born from this doubled night, one son divine and one son mortal, sharing the same mother and the same womb and the same childhood, but not the same fate. Hera's hatred was cosmic and immediate. She sent serpents to the cradle. Heracles, still an infant, strangled them. This detail is reported very calmly in the ancient sources, and I think the calmness is the point. Heracles killed the serpents not through planning or heroism, but through sheer strength that he did not yet understand he had. He was an infant strangling snakes in his crib, and he did not know that this was remarkable, and that not knowing, That innocence inside the power is part of what makes him compelling. He would grow into his knowledge of himself the hard way. He was educated by the best. Linus tried to teach him music. Heracles killed him when he was corrected. This is recorded without much editorializing in the sources, and perhaps it should be. Heracles was always the kind of person for whom the gap between ordinary frustration and catastrophic response was very small. He was not a subtle person. He was not a person who did things in proportionate measure. Everything he did was maximum. This is a kind of divine magnitude, and also, in moral terms, a kind of flaw. And the myth knows this even when it is celebrating him. Chiron, the wise centaur, trained many heroes. Heracles learned archery from Eurytus. He learned from everything and everyone, and he retained physical excellence while the moral education stayed surface level. He knew what was right. He did not always have access to that knowledge in the moment of extremity. Hera drove him mad. This is the center of it all, the thing you have to hold to understand everything that follows. Hera sent a madness upon Heracles, and in the madness he killed his wife Megara and his children. How many children the sources disagree on. The number ranges from 3 to 8. When he came back to himself, when the madness lifted and he saw what he had done, Heracles went to the oracle at Delphi and asked what he must do. The oracle told him to go to Eurystheus, king of Tiryns, and serve him for 12 years, performing whatever labors Eurystheus demanded. The 12 labors. Even people who know nothing else about Greek mythology tend to know this phrase. The Nemean lion, the Lernaean hydra, 9-headed or 12-headed, depending on the source, whose necks grew 2 new heads for every one that was cut off, until Heracles learned to cauterize the stumps with fire. The Carinician hind, the Adamantine boar, the Augean stables, which he cleaned by diverting 2 rivers, a solution so completely out of proportion to the expected approach that Eurystheus refused to count it as a completed labor. The Stymphalian birds, the Cretan bull, the mares of Diomedes, the flesh-eating horses whose master Heracles fed to them as a final irony, the girdle of Hippolyta, the cattle of Geryon, which required him to sail to the edge of the world and set up the pillars of Heracles at the edge of the Mediterranean as markers of the boundary of the known, the apples of the Hesperides, and finally Cerberus, the 3-headed guardian of the underworld, which Heracles brought to the surface world temporarily and then returned, because even Heracles understood that some things belong where they are. 12 labors, 10 originally, with 2 declared invalid and replaced. Eurystheus was a small man in every sense, and the myth makes sure you know it. He hid in a bronze jar when Heracles brought the Nemean lion, and he continued to make the labors harder whenever Heracles completed them too efficiently, because small men with large power always find ways to move the measure. Heracles completed them anyway, all 12, and was freed. What happened to him after is a longer story than the labors in some ways, and a quieter one. He had more adventures. He sacked Troy once, before the Great War, because Laomedon, the king of Troy, had refused to honor a bargain made with Poseidon and Apollo. He went to war with various kings, founded cities, fathered children by the score. The Heraclidae, his descendants, who would eventually return to reclaim the Peloponnese in the myth that the Dorian Greeks used to explain their own arrival. And then he put on a robe soaked in the blood of the centaur Nessus. Nessus had tried to abduct Heracles' wife Deianira, and Heracles had shot him with an arrow tipped in the Hydra's poison. As he died, Nessus told Deianira that his blood was a love potion, that if she ever feared Heracles was drifting from her, she should anoint his clothes with it, and his love would return. She believed him. She used it. Heracles put on the robe, and the blood of Nessus, soaked in Hydra venom, burned him, not just his skin. It burned into the flesh, into the bone, and could not be removed because the robe clung like the fire itself. Heracles built his own funeral pyre. He lay down on it. His mortal self burned, and the immortal part of him, because he was half divine, and divinity does not burn, ascended to Olympus. He was reconciled with Hera. He married Hebe, the goddess of youth. He became a god. This is the ending the mythology needed for him, and I believe it, and it also seems slightly too clean. The man who killed his wife and children in madness, who crushed an innocent music teacher, who spent 12 years serving a diminished king as penance for a crime Hera engineered. This man ascends to Olympus and marries Hebe and is reconciled with the goddess who destroyed his life. The Greeks could not quite bring themselves to give him a human ending. He was too much. And yet, before the apotheosis, before the fire, there is the image of Heracles on the pyre, in pain that no god could fully understand, because gods do not burn from the inside, and no hero had experienced, because no hero had quite that much divinity mixed into their mortal body. He was alone in that specific pain. He had been alone in a lot of things. Anyway, the war came. There are things about the cause of the Trojan War that have been said so many times they have turned smooth, and I am going to try to find the rough edges again. The judgment of Paris is not simply about beauty. It is about what you choose when choice costs you something. 3 goddesses, Hera, Athena, Aphrodite. A golden apple thrown by Eris, the goddess of discord, who was not invited to the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, and expressed her feelings about this in the most efficient way possible. The apple was inscribed, "For the fairest." The 3 goddesses each claimed it. Zeus, sensibly, refused to judge between them. He sent them to a mortal on Mount Ida, Paris, a prince of Troy, who had been exposed as an infant because of a prophecy and had survived and grown up as a shepherd because fate does not let prophesied people stay obscure. Each goddess offered Paris something. Hera offered him power and kingdoms. Athena offered him wisdom and skill in war. Aphrodite offered him the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose Aphrodite's gift. The most beautiful woman in the world was Helen, who was already married to Menelaus of Sparta. Aphrodite did not specify that this was a problem, or perhaps she specified it and Paris did not hear. He went to Sparta. He was a guest in Menelaus's house. He left with Helen, whether she went willingly, or was taken, or was compelled by Aphrodite's irresistible influence. The versions disagree, and the disagreement is itself meaningful, because the myth is refusing to simplify something about the situation that is genuinely not simple. The Greek kings had sworn an oath before any of this happened, before Helen married Menelaus, when every king in Greece wanted her. They had sworn, on the proposal of Odysseus, that whoever won her would have the protection of all the others, that any man who took her would face the combined force of Greek armies. It was an oath meant to prevent the civil war that might otherwise result from their competition. The oath became the mechanism for a different war entirely. Menelaus called on the oath. The kings came. Agamemnon, his brother, led them. Odysseus tried to avoid it. The oracle had told him he would not return for 20 years if he went, and he feigned madness, ploughing his fields with salt, until Palamedes placed his infant son in front of the plough, and Odysseus had to swerve, revealing his sanity. Achilles tried to avoid it differently. His mother, Thetis, knowing her son's fate, hid him on Skyros, dressed as a girl. Odysseus found him there too, by the trick of offering gifts to the women of the court, cloth and jewelry, and then, for one of them, weapons, and watching whose hands moved fastest to the blade. They could not escape. Nobody escapes the things they are made for. 1,000 ships. The number is impossible, and the myth knows it and does not care. What matters is the magnitude, the scale, the sense of a world being redirected toward a single point on the map. A city on the coast of Asia Minor, with its famous walls, its famous horses, its prince who made a foolish choice, and a king who would not give her back. Ares was at Troy. Of course he was. He was always where this much blood was being shed. But Troy is the place where his nature becomes most legible, most exposed, because at Troy the Greeks had a theological problem. Ares fought for Troy. He did not fight for Greece, the side the audience was expected to favor. He stood with Priam's city, with Hector and Paris, with the Trojans who were, in the Iliad's strange moral universe, not the villains exactly, but the ones who would lose, and Ares on the wrong side, the losing side, the side that the gods of civilization and order ultimately opposed, is Ares as the Greeks truly conceived him. He is not a partisan of justice or of civilization. He does not favor the righteous. He goes where the blood is thickest. On the Greek side, Athena, Hera, Poseidon, Hephaestus. On the Trojan side, Ares, Aphrodite, Apollo, Artemis. The alignment is not random. The Trojan gods are the gods of beauty, of desire, of sun and hunt, and war without reason. The Greek gods are the gods of order and craft and strategic thinking, and the sea that the Greeks controlled. The war on earth reflects a war in heaven, and the war in heaven is about which principle governs the world. The Greeks won. This is what the Greeks believed, and they built their entire cultural mythology on this belief, which tells you everything about how they understood the question of which principle governs the world. but winning took 10 years and cost them almost everything. Achilles, the best of the Greeks. He is the one around whom the Iliad organizes itself, not because he was always present. He was absent from most of the war, sulking in his tent because Agamemnon took his prize, the slave woman Briseis, in a gesture of dominance that was technically within his rights as commander and was also a kind of petty humiliation that Achilles could not forgive, but because his absence was itself a force, a negative space that shaped everything around it. He was the son of Thetis, the sea nymph, and Peleus, the mortal king. His birth was hedged about with prophecy from the start. There was a prophecy that Thetis' son would be greater than his father, which is why Zeus did not pursue Thetis himself, because a son of Zeus greater than Zeus was unacceptable, and so Thetis was married off to a mortal king instead. She knew what this meant for her son. She held him in fire or in the river Styx, the versions disagree, trying to make him immortal, trying to cheat the fate she knew was coming. The Styx made him invulnerable everywhere except the heel by which Thetis held him. The fire, in the version where Peleus interrupts the ceremony too early, made him immortal in every part that had been touched except his lips and his hair, where the fire had not yet reached. Either way, one small weakness. Either way, not enough. He came to Troy knowing he would die there. The prophecy was specific: a long life obscure and comfortable, or a short life at Troy and eternal fame. He chose Troy. He was the kind of person who could make that choice and live with it, which is not the same as saying the choice was easy. He fought brilliantly until Agamemnon wronged him. He withdrew. The Greeks suffered without him. Patroclus, his companion, the closeness between them is one of the most discussed relationships in all of ancient literature, and the question of its nature is one I will not reduce to a single answer. Patroclus asked Achilles to let him fight in his armor. "Let me go," Patroclus said, "in your place. Let them see your armor and believe you have returned." Achilles agreed and gave him the armor and told him, "Stop at the ships. Do not pursue them to the walls. Do not let your success tempt you beyond what I intended for you." Patroclus was too successful. He drove the Trojans back. He forgot the instruction, or chose to forget it, which is the kind of choice the myth does not condemn, but does not let pass without consequence. He reached the walls of Troy, and Apollo struck him. Apollo, the sun god, the beautiful one, the one who always seems incongruous in the business of killing. Apollo struck Patroclus's helmet from his head, buckled his knees, broke his spear. Phobos wounded him from behind. Hector finished it. Hector killed Patroclus in Achilles' armor. When the news reached Achilles, he made a sound. The Iliad describes it as a cry so great it brought Thetis up from the sea, that his mother heard him in the deep water and came. She sat beside him. She did not tell him it would be all right. She knew what was coming, and she did not lie to him. She simply came. He told her he was going back to war. She told him that if he killed Hector, he would die soon after. He said he did not care. He went back. He killed Trojans like a man who has decided that the only appropriate response to grief is the elimination of every distance between himself and the thing he hates. He killed Hector. He desecrated the body, dragging it behind his chariot around the walls of Troy. And Priam, Hector's father, watched from the walls, and in the Iliad's most quietly devastating moment, Priam goes to Achilles' tent at night, old and alone, to ransom the body of his son. He goes alone. He goes on the advice of Hermes, who guides him through the Greek camp invisibly. He finds Achilles. He kneels before him, and he says something extraordinary. He asks Achilles to remember his own father, old and far away, who will never see his son again either. Achilles weeps. They weep together, enemy and enemy, father and the man who killed his son. For a moment, the war is not between them. They are simply two people who have lost the same thing. This is the moment the Iliad is building toward. Not the victory, not the fall of Troy. This. Achilles died from an arrow. Apollo guided Paris's hand, they say, because Apollo was on the Trojan side, and because the arrow was always going to find him, because Thetis always knew. The arrow hit his heel. Some say he had fought his way to the Scaean gate, nearly inside Troy, and the war would have ended differently if the arrow had not come then. Some say he was meeting with the Trojan princess Polyxena, with whom he had fallen in love in Athena's temple, and the meeting was a trap. The meeting in the temple, if that is the version, there is something about it I find hard to shake. Achilles, who chose war over long life, who fought for glory, who became the supreme instrument of Greek victory, dying in a temple to Athena while reaching for something that was not war at all, dying for something ordinary, or ordinary seeming, a girl in a temple, sunlight on stone, an arrow from the shadow. Perhaps that is the most human ending for the most superhuman hero. The war ended without Achilles. It ended with the wooden horse, which was Odysseus's invention, the final trick of the trickiest man, and the Trojans brought it inside their walls themselves because they believed what they wanted to believe, that the Greeks had given up and left this gift as an offering, that the war was over, and the men inside the horse waited until the city slept and then came down. Troy burned. Priam was killed at the altar of Zeus, which is the kind of violation that even the victors knew they would pay for. Cassandra was taken. Andromache was taken. The city that had stood for 10 years of siege did not fall to an army breaking down its gates, but to a gift carried inside in celebration. This is what Ares produces, eventually. Not victory that looks like victory. Victory that looks like this. And where was Ares in all of it? He was there. He was always there. He was in the sound of bronze on bronze, and the arrows and the mud and the blood that had soaked into the plain of Ilion for 10 years. He was in the frenzy that made men capable of things they would not have believed of themselves. He was in the grief that came after, in the empty spaces where people had been. He was in the wooden horse, in the fire, in the slave chains on the women of Troy. He is always there. That is the thing about Ares that the Greeks understood and found intolerable and could not find a way to honor, he never stops. After Troy, the Greeks paid. This is the story the mythology tells with unusual consistency, with a uniformity that suggests it was important to the culture to believe this. The Greeks paid for what they did at Troy. Agamemnon returned home to Mycenae and was murdered by his wife Clytemnestra and her lover Aegisthus. He had sacrificed their daughter Iphigenia to get wind for the fleet. Clytemnestra had waited 10 years. The bath and the net and the axe. The King of Kings, who led 1,000 ships to war, died in his own bathtub. Odysseus took 20 years to get home, pursued by the wrath of Poseidon, and the Odyssey is the record of that journey. Ajax the Great, who had been the second best Greek warrior after Achilles, did not receive Achilles' armor when it was awarded after the hero's death. It went to Odysseus by vote because, the Greeks told themselves, his intelligence was more valuable than Ajax's strength. Ajax went mad from the humiliation. He slaughtered a herd of cattle and sheep, believing them to be the Greek commanders who had wronged him. And when he came back to himself and saw what he had done, he could not survive the shame of it. He fell on his sword. The returns from Troy, the Nostoi, are in many versions cursed. The Greeks violated too much. They killed Priam at Zeus's altar. They dragged Cassandra from Athena's sanctuary. They took what was sacred and used it as an instrument of war, and the gods, the same gods who had supported their cause, made them pay for the method. This is the pattern underneath the Trojan War, the one that emerges when you look at the whole arc rather than the individual stories. Violence, even justified violence, even divinely sanctioned violence, produces a residue, a cost. The cost does not always arrive immediately. It sometimes arrives in the third generation, in the son of the man who made the choice. But it arrives. And Ares, who was present through all of it, who is the very substance of that violence. Ares carries no curse. He cannot. He is the principle, not the practitioner. He does not suffer for what is done in war, because he is what war is. He cannot be held responsible for the cost of his own nature. This is perhaps the deepest reason nobody wanted to worship him. You cannot build a relationship with a principle. You cannot negotiate with a mechanism. You can fear a thunderstorm, but you cannot make an offering to it and feel confident in the exchange. Let me say something about fate, because we have been circling it for this entire telling, and I want to stop and look at it directly. The Greeks called it Moira, or the Moirai, the three fates, Clotho who spun the thread of life, Lachesis who measured it, Atropos who cut it. Even Zeus was understood, in many sources, to be subject to Moira, not in a way that humiliated him. The Greeks were careful about this, but in a way that placed even the king of gods within a larger order. A weave that predated everything, that the gods expressed rather than controlled. This is a sophisticated theological position, and I am not sure we have a modern equivalent that maps onto it cleanly. It is not quite predestination, because the Greeks believed in the genuine importance of human choice within the fated arc. Achilles chose glory over long life. The prophecy did not make the choice for him. It only presented the options. Oedipus tried to escape his fate, and his escape was the instrument of its fulfillment. But he still tried, and his trying was real, and the myth takes that seriously. It is more like there are certain shapes that life takes, regardless of the specific choices inside them. The son overthrows the father. The greatest power brings the greatest suffering. The love that crosses a boundary between guest and host, between mortal and divine, between sworn allies, pays a price. These shapes repeat. They are not punishment exactly. They are just the shapes. Ares is one of those shapes. He is the shape of violence recurring, the pattern of destruction that emerges whenever two things want the same thing and cannot share it. He does not cause wars. Wars cause him. Or rather, he and war are the same thing from different angles. The question of what to do with this, how to place a god who is ineliminable but intolerable, necessary but unwanted, is the question Greek culture spent centuries trying to answer, in myth and in philosophy, and in their surprising ambivalence about military values, even within a military culture. Sparta, the city most associated with war, had a complicated relationship with Ares that parallels this. They sacrificed to him. They honored him in certain ways, but their primary divine patron was, as I said, still Athena. And the Spartan rites of Ares involved the sacrifice of dogs, unclean animals by Greek standards, the least dignified offering. And some versions describe the sacrificial rites as performed with an urgency that looks more like appeasement than worship. You sacrifice to Ares the way you sacrifice to something that will hurt you if you don't. Not with love, with caution. There is a version of the myth in which Ares was actually worshipped more sincerely by the Scythians, the nomadic people from the steppes north of the Black Sea, who Herodotus describes as honoring Ares above all gods and making offerings to him through a great iron sword stuck in the top of an earthen mound. They gave him horses and cattle and a specific proportion of human prisoners. The sword was Ares. The sword in the mound was the closest physical form they gave their god. There is something right about this. Ares as a sword in the earth, not a temple, not a beautiful statue, a weapon embedded in the ground, surrounded by blood, waiting. The Greeks would have found this alien. They built Ares beautiful temples on the rare occasions they built them, because they built all their gods beautiful temples, because beauty was itself a form of honor. But they did not quite feel toward Ares what they felt toward the gods they loved, the gods they told personal stories about, the gods they believed walked among them and felt things and could be moved. Ares is the only Olympian who weeps in the Iliad. He weeps when his son Ascalaphus is killed in the fighting, and Athena stops him from going down to avenge the death, and he sits on Olympus and grieves. The image is jarring in a way that I find I cannot quite explain, and yet that is the kind of statement that should probably have a but after it, but I am going to let it sit. He weeps. The god of war weeps for his dead son on the slopes of Olympus. while the war continues below, and nobody comes to comfort him. Anyway, the myths came down from the ancient world into the Roman one, and the Romans did something interesting with Ares. They renamed him Mars and made him respectable. Mars is not the same god. He begins from the same mythological material, but he is processed differently, refined in a way that changes him substantially. Mars is the father of Romulus, the founder of Rome. He is not the unwanted child embarrassing his parents, but the progenitor of the greatest city in the world. Mars has a month named after him, March, the month when campaigning season began, when armies that had wintered could finally move again. He has the Campus Martius, the field of Mars, the great open plain beside the Tiber where Roman armies drilled and Roman citizens voted and Roman festivals were held. The Romans made Mars their second god, after Jupiter, but before almost everyone else. They gave him a priest, the Flamen Martialis, one of the 3 highest-ranking priests in Roman religion. They understood themselves as a martial people, and they wanted their war god to be a god they could be proud of. What did they do with the thing that made Ares Ares? The irrationality, the frenzy, the violence that does not serve strategy. They kept it, but they buried it. They put it in the etymology of the word martial and let it be implied rather than displayed. Roman Mars is disciplined, organized, oriented toward the defense and expansion of the Roman state. He is Ares with the embarrassing parts removed, or at least filed down. This is, incidentally, what Roman religion often did to Greek religion. It made it more useful. The gods became more legible as civic entities, more connected to Roman institutions, less strange and personal and contradictory. Jupiter is more dignified than Zeus. Juno is more regal than Hera, and Mars is considerably more respectable than Ares. The cost of this transformation is the loss of the thing that made Ares true. Mars is useful. Mars you can pray to before a campaign and feel that you have addressed the relevant deity in the correct register. Ares, the real Ares, the Homeric one who falls and covers 7 acres and weeps on Olympus and is despised by his father and trapped in nets by his brother and battles with a goddess who beats him with a mortal spear. Ares is not useful. He is just true. I need to pause here and say that I am aware we have been at this for a long time, and I want to make sure the thread is clear before we go to where we are going. The story of Ares is not the story of a villain. It is the story of a god who was made to hold the part of human experience that humans could not integrate. They needed him. They could not quite stand him. And the discomfort they felt, the refusal to build great temples, the lukewarm hymns, the sense that he was necessary but not beloved, that discomfort was itself a kind of insight. Because what is Ares really? He is the thing that happens when the violence inside human beings gets too large for the container of individual psychology and spills into the space between people. He is the principle by which disagreements stop being disagreements and start being catastrophes. He is what you get when fear and desire and scarcity all arrive at the same moment, in the same place, and there is no mechanism for resolution. He is real, more real in some ways than the gods who were loved. Athena is an aspiration. Apollo is a kind of ideal, the beautiful rational mind. Dionysus is an intoxication, but Ares is an observation. He is what you see when you look at the historical record without blinking. The Greeks blinked when they looked at him. They looked away just slightly, gave him the minimum required, asked him to please not embarrass everyone. This is the behavior of people who know something is true but find it incompatible with the story they need to tell about themselves. The story they needed to tell was, we are rational, we are ordered, we believe in law and logos and the examined life. We fight when we must, and we fight with discipline and intelligence, and we are better at war than our enemies because we think about it rather than just feeling it. Ares made that story complicated because Ares was also inside them, inside the Athenians who built the Parthenon and also burned Melos, inside the Spartans who wrote poems about dying in battle while also throwing their weakest infants from a cliff, inside the heroes at Troy who wept for their enemies and then desecrated their bodies. Ares was not the enemy of Greek civilization, he was its shadow. And perhaps this is why he endures. Not in temples, not in hymns, not in the warm, active memory of a people who prayed to him regularly. He endures in the category he occupies, in the idea of war as force of nature, war as principle, war as the part of us that is not redeemed by thinking. Every civilization since the Greeks has had to deal with Ares, by whatever name they gave him. Every civilization has had to figure out what to do with the god nobody wanted to worship, the necessary embarrassing truth at the center of the human animal. The Romans tried to domesticate him. Medieval Christendom tried to baptize the martial ideal. Modern culture tries to rationalize it, to explain violence as always reducible to some economic or political or psychological cause, as always something that could have been avoided with the right interventions. He keeps not going away. He is in the word martial, and in the month of March, and in the red planet that was named for him because it was the color of blood, and Mars was the god of blood. And when you look up at a red light in the sky, you are seeing a color that someone, a very long time ago, named for the god nobody wanted to love. There is something almost tender about that we gave his name to the angry red planet, that we kept him in the sky. The stories we have inherited from Greece are not stories about gods, not really. They are stories about the shapes that human experience takes, the recurring patterns, the recognizable arcs, the things that keep happening to us because of what we are. The son who overthrows the father, the guest who betrays the host, the greatest warrior who cannot be reached at the moment of greatest need, the prophecy that runs fastest when you run from it. Ares is one of these shapes. He is the shape of violence that exceeds its purpose, that continues past the end of the argument, that becomes its own justification. He is the pattern under the pattern, the mechanism that emerges when other mechanisms fail. The Greeks, who thought harder than almost any other civilization about the nature of human excellence, could not make themselves love him. They could not worship him with the warmth they brought to the gods they preferred. This is not because they were naive about violence. They were, if anything, more honest about it than most cultures that came after them, but because they were deeply committed to the idea that violence should serve something, that it should be in the service of strategy, of justice, of the city, of the gods, of glory, with some larger meaning attached to it. Ares was violence that served only itself and that they could not honor. But they knew it was true. They put it in the mythology. They made it a god and gave it a name and told stories about it and let it fight in the Trojan War on the losing side and let it be beaten by Athena and let it be publicly humiliated in the story of the net, and let Zeus say he hated it most of all his children. They told the truth about it, which is more than most civilizations have managed. The myths of Ares have a particular longevity that is hard to explain by purely rational means. He is not a beloved god. He has no devoted following, no mystery cult, no tradition of personal piety, and yet he persists in the scholarship and in the popular imagination in a way that seems out of proportion to his official standing. I think the reason is this: people recognize him. They have felt him, not in the abstract way you feel the idea of wisdom or love, but in the specific, physical, unreasonable way that violence enters the body, the narrowing of perception, the simplification of the world into friend and enemy, and the space between them, the strange exhilaration that the most honest accounts of battle describe, and the most honest veterans are most reluctant to speak about. He is recognizable because he is not outside human nature. He is part of it. The Greeks put him on Olympus, not because they thought war was divine, but because they put the largest and most powerful human impulses on Olympus, because that was where power lived, and war was one of the most powerful things they knew. He sits on Olympus still, in whatever sense dead gods sit anywhere, unwanted, necessary, weeping for a dead son, while the war his nature requires continues on the plain below. Nobody brings him offerings. Nobody sings him songs with warmth behind them. He is simply there, the thread in the myth, the one that runs from the first chaos through the Titans, through the Olympians, through the heroes, to Troy and beyond, comes to rest somewhere uncomfortable, in the acknowledgement that not everything in us is redeemable, that some things simply are what they are, that the God who is hated by his father and trapped by his brother and beaten in battle by his sister and loved, at last, only by the goddess of desire, that God is telling a true story, not a comfortable one, not the kind you want to build temples to, the kind you tell in the dark, when the fire is low and the night is long, and you want someone to remind you that the difficult things are not new, that the patterns you recognize in the world around you are old patterns, that someone a very long time ago sat with these same shapes and gave them names, and that the naming did not solve anything but it meant someone understood. Good night Wherever you are, sleep well. And if the night is hard, if the dark is the wrong kind of dark tonight, remember that even the gods had it complicated. Even on Olympus, there were things nobody wanted to face.